crash course by Grandpop for Australia, New Zealand, the South Pacific, which in turn is referred to as Oceania. Moving along very quickly, it begins with the focus on here, the didgeridoo, which is just a tubular instrument used by the Aborigines. That's their form of music and possibly communication. We don't need this slide, it's meaningless. Here we have the breakdown of Oceania. Okay, you have Australia, as you can see, New Zealand to the east of Australia, just to the north. Well, we'll come to that in the next slide. The rest of that is the islands of Oceania. Now we have Melanesia, which includes New Guinea, the Solomon Islands, etc. That is all right in here. Just north, there's New Guinea, just northeast of Australia. Then you have Micronesia, which is the Marshall Islands and these list of other islands, Guam, Yap, etc. That is the area just northeast of Melanesia. And then you have Polynesia, Hawaii, Futuna, blah, blah. These islands out here, Fiji, etc. And Hawaii is actually up here. It's not in the circle, but it is part of the Polynesia. And the Pacific Islands they are the three clusters that we spoke of here: Melanesia, Micronesia, and Polynesia. All right, moving down, landforms. This is Palau. Okay, this is a country with a set of about 500 islands. Okay, and they're all basically vegetation covered like this. They are about 500 of them in the country. Some may or may not be inhabited. They have some unique qualities, and we'll talk about that. Now we're looking at Australia and the topography. We have the Eastern Highlands. The Eastern Highlands are right here along the eastern coast. As you can see, the green are the lowlands along the edge. That's the coastal area. Then you have the mountains. The Great Dividing Range travels all the way down the coast. This is perceived to be when New Zealand actually broke away from Australia a couple of million years ago. These mountains are high, snowy mountains. But this coastal land is very, very good for agriculture, and this is one of the most densely populated portions of the island, of the continent, as a country. Okay, then you have the interior lowlands. This is a mixed bag. It's hot and dry, but there's decent soil, and you do have the aquifer under here. Okay, so that provides resources for water and farming, etc. Out even in the drier areas, it is a productive area, um, and I think most of the agriculture, aside from the Mediterranean areas, which you'll see, comes from within here, as well as the coastal area over here. Okay, now we move down. Of course, you see New Zealand, two islands, a North Island and a South Island. Talk about that a little bit more. By the way, here's Tasmania, if you wondered about it. It's part of Australia. The outback. The outback is actually part of the lowlands that we just looked at, the interior lowlands. That's the hot, dry section. Okay, it's a tough area, as you can see. Then you have the interior lowlands, which was the section that's under the Great Basin Aquifer. There's an underground reservoir, there are artesian wells, and as I stated earlier, most of the agriculture occurs there. settlement livelihood. I'm going to skip that. Now we have the Western Plateau, which is the biggest portion of the island. The Western Plateau is a mixed bag also. As you can see, there's a lot of there's plateaus, there's lowlands, there's uh, coastal areas which are sometimes pretty conducive to farming, and of course, we're still looking at New Zealand over here in the structure of the islands north and south. That'll come up a little bit more later. Now, the Western Plateau, as we start to talk about, flat desert for the most part, poor farming. Here's where the Aborigines really hang out. Okay, you also have the erosion weathering landforms. This is Ayers Rock, which is a very popular sightseeing and geological phenomenon. It's made out of sandstone, and it was created by wind erosion over thousands of years because it was the firmest soil there. We move down. This is nothing. Now we have New Zealand. We have the North Island, which, as we know, is the most populous one, and the South Island. Let's look at the topography of those. As you can see, it's mixed. North Island, rolling hills, productive agriculture. There are some mountains, certainly, even with snow, but you can see this mixed terrain is very positive for agriculture and climate. They have warmer temperatures. There's volcanic activity up there. These are the hot springs on the North Island. They get geothermal energy from those hot springs. South Island has permanent snowfields. It's colder south, but it's closer to Antarctica, which, is just the opposite of the northern hemisphere, like Alaska, which is closer to the North Pole and it's cold. So it's further from the equator. That's why it's colder, and it has significant mountain peaks, as you can see. Snowfields, alpine forests in between the mountains, a lot like Colorado, if you want to picture that with all the evergreen trees in between the mountains. When we get to New Guinea, we leave the Australian mainland. New Guinea is the second largest island in the world. Okay, that's probably the most important thing you need to know about it. It's north of Australia. Interesting part: the western part of that island of New Guinea, which would be on the left, is Indonesian, and the eastern part on the right, you can't see the division, is a free, uh, independent country. Pacific Islands. That's the big circle. Okay. Here's New Guinea. You can see this part is owned by Indonesia, and this is Indonesia over here, and the right part is independent. Here's the whole mixed Micronesia, Melanesia, everything is over here in the Pacific Islands. It falls into one category and three regions within that category that we talked about earlier. Pacific Islands that come in two forms, two kinds of islands: high volcanic islands like this. You see some of that with Hawaii. If you ever saw the cliffs of Nepali, where Grandma and Grandpa went years ago, fabulous, fabulous, beautiful tropical forests. There are huge waterfalls, as was we saw in Hawaii. Same thing, tremendous waterfalls. And then you have atolls. Atolls are different, as I'll explain in a second. Um, this particular area is coconut. They have coconut palms, and they are low islands. They're usually pretty low, not like the volcanic islands, which jut up pretty high. Uh, An atoll is a coral, essentially. It's a ring-like volcanic island, and it's surrounded by shallow water. The islands basically were formed when they were forming. They started out as volcanic, but then they flattened out over the millennium of time, and they became much lower islands, and all that remained was the coral that collected around the islands and created a magnificent marine life form sanctuary. Uh, Lagoons in these islands. Um, they're very beautiful islands. They're very tropical. They are low, and there is a lot of flooding, and they are subjected a lot to the global climate change as the ocean waters rise. Here's an example of how the island forms. Okay, let's not get ahead of ourselves here. Stupid ass cursor. Okay, let's look at some of the climate. As you can see here, Australia, the interior climate is dry. These two areas down here in the south are the Mediterranean kind of areas. The climate is cool, but it has a consistent seasonal. The seasons are consistent. Even though they're closer to the North Pole, the ocean does warm them to a degree. And this is where the grapes for Australian wine industry is big deal. That occurs down here and these are two of the largest cities, Melbourne and Perth. There's a lot of fishing industry down here. But here the interior island is dry, and as you can see, the northeast and the coast is kind of tropical and wet. Okay, mountains cause that. New Zealand climate, a little bit too far, but okay. We have the North Island. You have Auckland, the capital of New Zealand. You can see the industries here. A lot of livestock is a big issue. Okay. This is where most of the people live. This is where the climate is certainly the most moderate and it's most conducive to uh, different kinds of agriculture and livestock raising, etc. Now, down here in the South Island, which is much more mountainous, has much colder regions, some of those mountains are permanently snow covered. You do have Christchurch, which is another major, actually, Christchurch is the capital of New Zealand. I'm sorry. Okay. Auckland is a major city, but Christchurch is the capital. Okay. Um, Not as populated, but a big tourist attraction. Big tourist attraction. That's where a lot of people travel to when they say they're going to New Zealand. They're taking an adventure vacation. Pacific Island climate summary here, warm temperatures, high elevations, orographic rain. Remember what that is? That is clouds that come in off the ocean or off of somewhere. Heavy clouds filled with moisture, they hit the mountains, and the clouds are forced up higher because they're trying to pass over the mountains in the wind, and they're forced into the colder atmosphere, and that colder atmosphere turns all the rain in those clouds to snow, just like the Rocky Mountains. As the winds come from the west in the U.S., travel over the Rockies, we get all that snow at Breckenridge and Vail and those countries, those areas in Colorado. And here's a picture of the clouds as they roll in across the mountain. Down here, sometimes if the temperatures are warmer, it won't be snow. It will be very heavy rainfall, significant rainfall, as you see on the east coast of Australia and New Zealand on the west coast. Environmental history, over quickly go through these. Flora and fauna, the marsupials are the major unusual species on the island. You have the kangaroo, you have the koala, They like to eat the eucalyptus. You have the wombat. I'm not sure what they're good for, to be honest with you. Tasmanian devil, which is a vicious predator. All right, on the island of Tasmania, but that's where they primarily are. You have the flightless kiwi. Can't fly. He's a night bird. He crawls around in the high grass looking for bugs and crap like that. And then you have the penguins. All along the south area of, which is facing Antarctica, you'll find penguins on the South Island of New Zealand and southern Australia. Then you have the duck-billed platypus, which is, maybe you'll recognize the word, mono, meaning one. Okay, it has, I don't know how to make that, mono and mammal. It's a mammal that lays eggs. Okay, all the M's, milk, mono, mammal. Maybe that'll help. I'm trying to pick it up at the last minute. Very, only place in the world they're found. Stupid looking animal. Marine environments, you have the Great Barrier Reef. There's the reef. There's a guy chasing a stingray. Big tourist attraction. The Great Barrier Reef in Australia is a livelihood for seafood and fishing and many exotic marine products. It's been raped by tourism and overfishing. Countries from all over the world send their fleets down there and strip the ocean of its resources. Water tourism is big. They have the dolphin swims, etc. Uh, and you have in New Zealand the minerals. Remember the grade. Punama, greenstone, basically that's what it's called. And it's protected by a treaty. It's a very unique stone. It's a kind of form of jade, and it's symbolic. It's symbolic to the country because it's the only place it's found. Many ornaments and jewelries and things are made out of this jade. The money stone, you remember that? Those big round stones called, they're on Ray. Okay? Ray and money stone goes together. And there's limestone in Palau, which is a big island. It's a big resource for limestone, which actually makes the money stone. Yap. Yap is the island that has huge pieces of money stone. I don't know if that's helpful or not. And then, of course, the traditions are built around the money stone. And here's a typical sign for the Australian desert and the animals beware signs. And you have feral. Camels are feral, aggressive, bit nasty. That's basically what feral means. You have exotic rats. Camel's exotic, by the way. And exotic simply means that you brought the animal into the country somewhere along the way, and it's not a native to that country. And in a lot of cases, it doesn't have a natural predator. But there are exotic snakes, dogs, cats, pigs, the rabbits, of course, which was a huge problem, still is. And there's the rabbit. Overpopulate in the billions. They've tried poisoning them. They built the fence. Oh, all kinds of things built around those rabbits. They destroy the crops. The predator was introduced in the dingo. Now they're a problem a little bit. They're pretty well under control. Merino sheep. It's the most weirdest looking sheep in the world. It's from New Zealand. If you recognize the word, you'll be able to do a multiple choice on that. And of course, they have sheep and cows on the island of both islands. Actually, the white sheep is a native, and it's a very popular export for both both countries. And that's the end of this segment.